We got a really, really awesome speaker here tonight, Martin, uh, covering the second half of the evening. And I just had to look it up. When was the last time you were speaking here? That was actually last year.
It was last year here at Zalora.
Here in Zalora as well.
February or something, I think?
Yeah, February, March.
Yeah.
So yeah, already a while back. But super happy to have you here again. And tonight with the decision stack. So yeah, thanks for coming. Take it away.
Thank you so much. As Rosemary said, it's always super exciting to come out to Product Tanks. I think, so for those of you who don't know, I actually started Product Tank in London back in 2010. I wanted to be able to meet other product managers. I was in a startup job. It was a bit of a lonely job. And I just set up a meetup to try and meet other people, same as has basically been happening around the world. And so it's super exciting to be able to travel around and find these communities all over the world now and realize that we kind of share a lot of the same challenges. So thank you for having me, guys. It's great to be in Singapore. So yeah, my name is Martin Eriksson. I've been doing product for over 25 years. I helped grow Product Tank to now actually 190 cities, because as soon as I write down the number, it changes. And then I also co-wrote a book on product leadership published by O'Reilly a couple of years ago. And I also co-founded Mind the Product, which is the world's largest product conference and community. We have conferences in London, San Francisco, and of course now in Singapore as well. We had our inaugural event earlier in March, and we'll be back again next March. And one of the really fascinating things about being part of this community at a global scale and being able to travel around and talk to people working on product all over the world is that we actually face the same challenges. It doesn't matter if you're working for a software as a service startup in San Francisco, a fintech startup in London, or something to do with banking here in Singapore. It kind of doesn't matter. We are all working on the same challenges. We're all trying to figure out how to build the right thing. And this is basically the feedback that we get from all of our community members around the world. This is kind of the fundamental question that product managers have to answer. And it comes down to one thing. It comes down to decisions. So every single day, as product managers, as engineers, as designers, data scientists, we're making hundreds and hundreds of decisions. Should this button be here or here? What is the text on the button? Are we doing this story or that story? Are we prioritizing this thing over that thing? Constantly having to make decisions. And the tricky thing with that is it can get really fatiguing. It can be really hard to make high quality decisions at velocity over a long period of time. And it exhausts you. There is a thing called decision fatigue, which we get a lot when we come up to the conference and we're kind of planning all of these things, and literally every day is just 1,000 little decisions. And you get home at the end of the day and you literally can't decide what you want for dinner. You're like, just put food in front of me. I don't want to make a decision. So it's really important to figure out how to make these decisions faster, but also maintaining quality. And the interesting thing about decisions in English is that it comes from the Latin decidere, which is to cut off. And I think that's one of the things that we do often as product managers, but we kind of forget about, that it's all about those compromises. In order to decide to do something, you're deciding not to do something else. And so the questions that keep coming up, the decisions that we keep making, are figuring out what should we do, why are we doing that, and how are we going to do it? And that's really what the decision stack is all about. Now, there's nothing new in here, but I think I've figured out a way to connect the dots that seems to help a lot of people to understand how to connect that very top level decision that we make every single day. And it starts with a strong vision. Hopefully most of your companies have a really good vision. They understand what they want to do. They understand the problem that they're solving in the world. And then it's about coming up with a solid strategy or product strategy, your objectives down into epics or experiments or stories or whatever methodology you're using, all the while being underpinned by product principles. And I think that bottom stack is one of the things that we forget a lot about, kind of connecting the dot from principles back up to vision. And I'll go through all of these steps now. But remember, the key point in all of this is that every step of the way, you're deciding what not to do. So you're cutting stuff out. And that's actually what makes it easier for you to keep making decisions, because you know that we're not doing that. That's not a priority for us. We're doing this instead. So this is the decision stack. And the way to think about this is you've probably all heard about the 5 whys, but the decision stack, if you start from the top, is actually all about how. So if you're talking about your vision, how are you going to achieve that vision? Well, here's our strategy to achieve that vision. Okay. How are you going to achieve that strategy? Well, here's the objectives or the goals that we're going to set. Here's the epics that we're going to build in order to achieve those objectives. And here's the principles that underpin how we build every single one of those pieces. If you look at the other side, it is about asking why. So if you want to go from the bottom up, if you're thinking about stories or epics, why are we building these? Well, in order to achieve these goals. Why are we doing those goals? Well, to achieve this strategy, and all the way back up. And again, principles is one of those interesting things that kind of ties your vision back into that everyday decision making, and I'll go through that in a second. The other thing to note, in most companies, unless you're a very small startup with one single product, this is not a single stack for your whole company. You basically get decision inception, where every layer of the business, whether it's a business unit, whether it's a company, a product line, a user set, will have its own set of objectives, its own vision, its own strategy, all the way down. But they still tie back up to the same headline. And so if we start about asking the why, it's really about setting a really strong vision for your company. And whether you do it at the company level, which some of us don't have impact on, we can't go tell the CEO to change the product vision. You can do it for your own product, your own area, your feature, whatever it is that you own and are responsible for. And if you Google product vision or vision, you'll get this kind of template to be the leading / best provider / supplier of customer focused / market driven solutions, product, service, right? Delete as appropriate. This doesn't work. The point is there is no kind of fill in the blank vision statement. You have to really think about it from your own point of view. And the reason this is so important is that vision provides you with focus. According to a bunch of research, 75% of venture-backed startups fail. And the number one reason cited by the founders of those startups is a lack of focus. And if Harvard Business School is telling you that, then we should probably be listening. In other research that came out, it's also about motivation, right? So Daniel Pink, who wrote The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, based on a bunch of research that came out of MIT, kind of realized that to motivate employees beyond basic tasks, we have to give them autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Because the desire to do something that has meaning is important. And if you saw me speak that last time, I talked a lot about this and how to set up teams to do this. So you might recognize the next slide as well. Because vision is also about alignment. This is a chart by Henrik Nieberg, who's the organizational coach behind the Spotify model. And if you look here at it's a bit hard to read. If you start at the bottom with low alignment and low autonomy, you have kind of a micromanaging organization and a very indifferent culture. If you move up the alignment scale, it's kind of a very authoritative organization. The boss is telling everyone what to do, where to go. I was just talking to Evgeny and heard about somebody in the room whose CTO is setting the task for every engineer in the organization. They're probably in that bucket. If you instead move up the autonomy scale, it's probably like most startups, actually. It's a very entrepreneurial organization. There's no alignment. Everyone's kind of doing whatever they want. They're running off in different direction. And you kind of hope somebody's working on the problem. And like any good 2x2, the consultants in the room will know this. You want to be in the top right corner. High alignment, high autonomy, where leadership and the vision is still there to set that goal, but kind of leaving the team to figure out how to get there. And that's how you get an innovative organization and a collaborative culture. So a good vision is customer-centric. It's concise and clear. It sets an audacious goal. It's probably not something you can achieve in the next 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. It's a really, really big goal. And it avoids that detail. You're not talking about how you're going to get there. You're not talking about how you're going to solve that problem. That comes later. A bad vision, on the other hand, is company-centric. It's all about what we're going to do as a company. It doesn't tackle challenges. It kind of glosses over that this is going to be super easy. It mistakes goals for strategies, so again, setting very kind of detailed goals. And it sets kind of bad strategic objectives. So some examples from around the world, companies that you probably have heard of. IKEA, our vision is to create a better everyday life for many people. It's about the people. They want to create a better life. And that gives them a lot of freedom, right? That's furniture, they're building more and more smart devices, they're doing, they've bought a company that does kind of in-home services so they can assemble the furniture for you, deliver things for you, all that kind of stuff. Bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And if you have a body, you are an athlete. That's Nike's vision. Again, very big vision, right? Very open, gives you a lot of opportunity of how to go solve that problem. Microsoft's used to be, it's changed recently, a computer on every desk and in every home. Again, huge audacious goal when they first set this in the 80s. They've kind of achieved that to some extent, and are not alone, but they have achieved that to some extent and are now moving on to other things. And then Kickstarter was to help bring creative projects to life. Again, big, open-ended vision. And the final example here is Oxfam, which is a charity in the UK that is a world without poverty. Like, we all know that's not going to happen in our generation, but that's a fantastic vision to go for. Can you imagine how motivating it would be to work on that product and know that that's what you're trying to solve every day? So once you set your vision, it's time to take that next step and figure out what you're actually going to do to deliver that. And this is where there's a disconnect between long-term and short-term. I advise a lot of startups as an EIR for a venture firm in Europe, and as a freelance kind of product consultant, and there's kind of a big disconnect here between these kind of big visions that a lot of companies have figured out how to write and like Google, like, oh, I should have a big vision, and then they get really into the details. And there's a disconnect between high level and detail, which means that we get a lot of great vision, but no execution, or the other way around, no vision, but great execution, but in the wrong direction, right? So there's that missing step in the middle, and I think a lot of us have kind of forgotten these lessons. That most businesses 10, 20 years ago were focused a lot on, and it's because it's a little bit hard, and that's how to set a strategy. Because a vision alone is not enough. Strategy is there to acknowledge the problems and challenges and lay out a plan of how to overcome those in order to achieve your vision. And product strategy is about how to attain that vision. It could be your value proposition, it could include key feature areas, and it could also include business goals. I always want to quote Sun Tzu in a talk. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. So if you're just executing, it doesn't matter if you're building the best software in the world, shipping the most lines of code, shipping story points every 2 weeks. It doesn't matter if you're not headed in the right direction. And to start your strategy, there's a million different methodologies. If you Google this, you can kind of go slightly crazy. There's SWOT, there's SCORE, there's SOAR, noise. There's all the, oh, I skipped a bit too far there. But the point is that they're all tackling the same things, and they're all basically trying to do their own spin on the SWOT. It's really about thinking about what is your current situation? Where are you today? What is the outcome that you're aiming for? What are the opportunities that you can leverage in order to get there? And then what are the possible actions to start moving down that path? So in terms of thinking about your situation, think about your customers, think about your market, think about the context that your product today exists within with your customers. Is it one of their key tools? Is it in the middle of a chain of 5 different tools that they have to use? What are those things? Where is the market? What's the competitors looking like? Is it a growing market? Is it a shrinking market? All of these things set up your situation to understand really where you are, and this is where you have to be brutally honest with yourself of like, we're doing really well in this area, but not this area, so that you understand where you can leverage. And that's where thinking about your challenges come in, right? Thinking about the competition, thinking about changing behavior in your market. Are people moving more towards these tools, away from these tools? Are they adopting different things? What are those trends that either you're missing or you're about to leverage in order to be able to win? And then also think about your opportunities. So again, in the market, is there an opening in that market? Is there something in the technologies or trends that's changing and would be an opportunity for you to go and seize? If you were in e-commerce 10 or 15 years ago and you had a great mobile app, you were about to leverage a huge shift in everybody moving to mobile for e-commerce. And if you saw that coming, if you saw that trend coming, you could position yourself to really leverage that. And then finally thinking about what actions can you take? If you saw Marty Kagan's talk a while ago, you know that he always talks about our job as being about discovering that which is valuable, usable, and feasible. And the trick here is obviously to think about feasible. It's the technology. Can we build it? What is it going to cost to build it? It's thinking about usable, making it, a delight to use, thinking about the UX, but really thinking about value as well. I think, again, we forget about that. We get stuck in the glossy stuff of designing good products. We get stuck in working with UX on building great designs. I do that too because I come from that background. But really we have to think about what's valuable. What's valuable for your customers and what's valuable for your business. And if you find something that's in that intersection, then you know that it's going to be a product that can succeed. So good product is based on your current reality. You have to be honest about yourself. Where are you? What's working, what's not working? It takes those challenges and tackles them head on. It outlines that value chain of really understanding what's driving the value. Is it you? Is it your customer? Is it the things the customer does on your platform? Where is that value going, and how can you follow that chain? It includes coherent actions to start getting towards that goal. And it emphasizes focus over compromise. A bad strategy, on the other hand, is full of meaningless fluff. You've probably seen a lot of these. It doesn't tackle challenges, just pretends everything's rosy. We're going to build this thing that I have in my head, and it's a perfect strategy. Doesn't matter that everyone else is building exactly the same thing. It mistakes goals for strategies, so it sets up numeric goals, OKRs, whatever, instead of really thinking about what is the strategic shift that you need to make, and therefore sets bad objectives. And too many strategies, sadly, are kind of budgets combined with market share projections, and that really isn't going to help you innovate or think about really solving your customer problem. A way to think about it is really to understand that product strategy is a series of product market fits. So it doesn't really matter how you map this out, but if you think about kind of what the adjacencies are, so in this example, it might be your geographies. So if you're starting in Singapore, that's your first step, right? That's where you launch, you're focused on Singaporean customers, and then maybe you're going to Southeast Asia. What's that mean in terms of language support, other things that you need to do in order to get to that? And then what's the next adjacency after that? Maybe it's APAC or East Asia, and then eventually it's the world, right? But what are those steps, those adjacency steps, that little extra step that will take you to that next level? Because if you can map that out, you can understand where you are currently, right? And you can also understand what you need to do in order to get to that next level that you want to do. And really understand that each of those steps is a series of product market fits. It doesn't stop with that first product market fit of, I'm in Singapore, I have a customer, I've sold them a product, great, we have product market fit, right? You have to keep thinking beyond that. It's what's the next segment, what's the next market, what's the next product, what's the next feature that we can add? So great product strategy is really about focusing on those adjacent steps. At the same time, strategy is art and science, right? This is why it's hard. It's not like an OKR, you set a goal and you measure the objectives. It really is an art. And it's still a hypothesis. You're trying to put some science behind that hypothesis, but it's still a hypothesis. It's an inductive leap that you have to subject to the same logical and empirical tests before it can be validated. So strategy is about making tough choices. It's about providing focus for the organization. It's outlining the actions needed to achieve that vision. And it's an exercise in problem solving, which we all do well because we're product managers. Then the next step is kind of skipping down to the bottom a little bit, and it's figuring out how are you going to build these things. And the reason I kind of jump ahead a little is that principles are really fundamental in order to figure out how you're going to build each feature that you do. But they really stem from that vision and that strategy. As just the founder of Disney said, it's not hard to make decisions when you know what your values are. So whether you call these product principles, design principles, values, you've probably seen 1,000 different names for these. It's really a framework for decision making. And it's supposed to help you in all of those tiny decisions every single day, right? You shouldn't have to figure out, should this button be green or blue? You have a design system, you have values that says it's green. It's specific and actionable rules. Some examples might paint this a little bit better. So Google has one of their values is focus on the user and all else will follow. So if you're in a conversation at Google about a product feature and you're arguing about whether you want to build something that's, might upset a user, but it serves an ad buyer better, the answer is always going to be easy. It's like, no, we fall on the user side, and the ad users will, or the ad buyers will follow. Klarna, which is a payment platform out of Sweden and does online payments, but also kind of credit scoring stuff. They have one of their core ones is actually that profitability optimization. So as a business, they're always looking at, if we have a choice between two things, which is going to help us with conversion? Because that's our ultimate metric. That's the most important one. And I used to work at Monster, the job board, which is where I really learned the power of having these clear principles, because our foremost principle was that job seekers came first. Because if you built the best possible product for the job seekers, if it's a site that they come to search for jobs, register their CV, understand what's happening, read content, recruiters are going to follow those job seekers. So there was definitely a whole team that was working on building the best possible product for recruiters, but even they would have that as a heuristic to say that we're not going to build this feature because even if it might give us a 5 or 10% uplift on recruiter fees or whatever, if it upsets job seekers and they don't come back, then we've kind of screwed the business. One way to think about this is to use something called even over statements. And it really helps you get specific about the trade-offs that you want to do and really embed that into your DNA as a company. So for example, conversion even over revenue. If you make this statement, maybe it's the other way around, you're saying that you want to optimize everything for conversion and that revenue comes second. User growth even over revenue. Mobile experience even over desktop. What are those trade-offs that you want to make and that you probably have conversations about every single week or maybe even every day with the team and get into these arguments and trying to figure out what can you codify that you're doing one or the other. And again, they have to tie to your strategy, they have to tie to your vision so that you're making the right choices. Good principles, therefore, make decisions easy. They describe how you want to build your product. They're very specific to your company. No two principles are going to be the same. They're easy to remember, and they evolve over time. They're not static. And really, principles are there to help maximize decision-making velocity and reduce all of those minor conflicts that we come up with, all of those little decisions that we have to make day to day. So I'm trying to get through this quicker, but now that we've set up our kind of vision and strategy, we also have a somewhat understanding of our principles, although they're going to evolve over time. What's next? You've probably heard a lot of this stuff already, but obviously it's about setting your objectives and actually setting the teams to work, figuring out how are we going to achieve that strategy that helps achieve that vision. And this is where, again, if you ask me, I'm a big, big believer in cross-functional autonomous teams. So of course I'm going to say that our job, and especially as leaders, is to declare intent and give autonomy to our teams. And what I mean by that is really like socializing that vision and strategy within your organizational team, and then letting them work out how they can help achieve that goal in their areas. And the way that works is, in a traditional organization, you probably have your company goals. The company then goes and tells each team, this is your goal, how are you going to help achieve that? The team then goes and tells each individual, this is what your goal is. By the end of the quarter, you need to build this thing or ship this thing. And then at the end of the quarter, you realize that you missed all your goals because none of them were realistic, right? So this doesn't really work anymore. Instead, if you think about it as commitment instead of control, it still starts with a vision, still starts with strategy and goals, but then it's about stepping back and kind of letting the team figure out, okay, now that we know what those goals are, we know our customer, what can we help build? What can we help deliver in order to achieve those goals? And I think it's interesting to hear, like, even some of the conversations I had tonight about that might not be a product feature, right? I think sometimes it's about thinking, how can I help customer service be more efficient? How can I help some other internal tooling deliver a better service to our customers? And that's actually going to help achieve the goal better than a shiny new feature that you may or may not do that. But each team can then go off and figure out, what are we going to do? What are we going to achieve? They can come back with a commitment and say, okay, this is what we think we can do. We can deliver this. We think it's going to have this impact. Each team comes back, and again, immediately you realize that you're going to miss your goals before the quarter even started, because the teams are committing to what they actually can achieve. And that's an opportunity for us to figure out, do we need more teams? Do we need different resources? Do we need to help Team B do more so they can commit more? But it highlights those issues much earlier. You've probably heard about OKRs. Hopefully a lot of you are using OKRs. But this is how it kind of sets up that autonomy, right? Because objectives are qualitative, they're inspirational, they're time-bound, whether it's a quarter or a year, they're actionable, and then the key results are really figuring out whether you achieve that objective or not. They're quantifiable, and maximum, ideally, of 3 metrics. And really, this all helps you set up something that I'm hoping you're hearing a lot of from the product community, about thinking about outcomes over outputs. Because features, stories, bugs, lines of code, they're all worthless if they're not solving a problem and if they're not achieving an outcome. And outcomes, therefore, have to be meaningful to the business and measurable by the team. But it's also important to recognize that outcomes have impact. So thinking further than that, not just the outcome within the business, I'm going to increase conversion by X or revenue by Y. What does that actually have as an impact over our user? Is that changing behavior? Is that helping them solve their problem, live their lives better, do their work faster, earn more money, whatever it is that you're trying to solve for them? Starting to come down on the home stretch here. Next is really about thinking how to connect all those dots, right? So I've talked about every single layer through the whole thing. And I wanted to use an example that everyone recognizes. So starting with Alphabet, right? So they have this corporate vision that's across all of the Google companies, which is to make the world around you universally accessible and useful. Again, it's a great lofty goal, right? Something we could all buy into that wanting to work on. If you then start looking at the companies that are part of Alphabet, they're all related. You can see that these are all coherent. They all follow on from each other. So Google is to make the world's information universally accessible and useful. The best search engine in the world, basically. Nest, which is all about IoT and homes, hardware and software, is to create a home that takes care of the people inside it and the world around it. YouTube's is to give everyone a voice and to show them the world. So you can see that these all tie into each other. They all tie into that corporate vision, while understanding that they all have different parts to play within that. If we then dig down into Google, again, their vision is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. So one of their strategies is to leverage an unrivaled store of data, right? They have the biggest store of data, they have the best crawlers, they have the most data, to better understand the content and serve the user with fast, accurate results. So some of their objectives recently have been things like improving the crawl rate to capture more data, right? Because that serves that need to get more data. Improving the ranking algorithms so they better understand content. So that's, again, tying into better understanding. Improving speed of search. And some of the principles that they have are about speed, accuracy, obviously, but also being secret, because they don't want SEO optimizers to know how to game the system. They want it to be a bit of a black box. So whenever they're figuring out anything that they're trying to build, they're always mindful of, like, how do we keep the secret? How do we make this actually hard to understand so that you can't game the system? And then finally, kind of wrapping up a little around who should be involved in this process. So again, I believe in very open leadership. I think strategy is leadership. It's still hugely important to have that leader set a vision, set a strategy. And as leaders, you have the overview and the insight and the experience to make those intuitive leaps that actually make for a good strategy. But everybody in the company or the team owns the outcomes, so you can't do this behind closed doors. As the American World War II general said, if you tell people where to go, but not how to get there, you will be amazed at the results. And so a way to think about it is that at the early stages, when you're setting that big vision, that big company or team vision, it's definitely a leadership role. You still want to involve the team, you want to get feedback, you want to understand, like, are they understanding the vision that you're setting? It might make perfect sense in your head, but if it doesn't make sense for everyone in the team, then it's not going to be a useful tool. And then as you get down to the detail of what you're actually building, the team owns it 100%. And somewhere in between, like, leadership steps out, right? And where that line is going to be different depending on your company, depending on your culture, depending on your country. But it's really thinking about the team's always involved, and at some point leadership has to step back. And that's maybe a line that you can start moving, start thinking about how to move that. And it comes down to communication. So John Maeda, when he was on stage here at Mind the Product Singapore earlier in March, said that clarity is a combination of transparency and understanding. And I think we talk a lot about transparency, and we feel like we're doing a really good job if we're super transparent about our goals. We're communicating our OKRs, we're sending out decks, we're sending out email updates. And it's great, but if we're not checking that people actually understand, if they're not thinking the same way you are about those goals, they might misinterpret it. They might misunderstand what you're trying to do. Therefore, they might head in a different direction or think that you're not doing something important. So it's really important to combine both transparency and understanding. And to do that, you really have to over-communicate both the vision and strategy. You literally cannot repeat it enough. The startups that I go and advise, I tell the CEO to basically say it every single time they're standing in front of more than 2 people in a room. Like, as you know, our vision is X. Like, literally have to hammer it home. At Mind the Product, the team probably hates me because every time we have a bigger offsite or all hands, I put up a blank slide and I ask everyone, what's our vision? No one remembers. Some people remember.
Amy always remembers.
And it's something that we wrote together the beginning of this year. So you just have to over-communicate these things, right? And you have to remind everyone. If you're in a physical space, it's one of our challenges, right? We're a remote team, we're spread out all over the UK and 1 person in the US. If you're in an office, put them up on a wall. It feels silly sometimes to have to think about, oh, I have to print this on a big thing and put it up on a wall. Everyone knows this, but they don't, right? Because you get stuck in your detail, you get stuck in what you have to do every day. And then, repeat it at every all hands, as I said. There's this great tool, and I love it partly because the amazing German name, called Auftragsklärung, which was started by Xing in Germany, which is basically the LinkedIn, if you will, for German-speaking countries. And they are great supporters of Product Tank. They run Product Tank Hamburg. One of their employees co-hosts Mind the Product Hamburg, our conference. And they really have talked about this both internally and externally as a kind of a tool that they use. And really it just means mission clarity. And the tool is literally this giant sheet of paper. And I kind of don't care what you put on the paper because that's going to be company dependent. But they have this, situation, complication, intent, boundaries. It's kind of based on a lot of those lean startup maps and things that you will see, but personalized to their needs and what they're focused on. And the reason it's so valuable is that every single team, and I think at this point they have around 40 autonomous product teams, every single team uses the same template. So when they're going to start a new product or a new feature, they print out another one of these giant sheets. And sometimes they'll write on it, sometimes they'll stick up a post-it note, sometimes they'll print out a design and stick it on there. And they'll bring it with them when they go into a kind of an all-hands meeting of this is what we're working on. And the reason it's so valuable is that everyone's speaking the same language. When one team goes to talk to another team, it's oh, what's your situation? What's the complication? What's the strategy to achieve that? Whatever the language is that you're using, again, doesn't matter what you're putting on there, just that it is consistent within your company. And it gives you that shared language to talk about what you're struggling with, what you're working on, for your team to understand what your goal is and how to get there. And finally, kind of starting to talk about change, right? So these things are not static. As the Agile Manifesto itself says, we value responding to change over following a plan. So if you look at the stack, the vision is fairly static, right? You're not going to change that very often. The company kind of exists to solve that vision. It might change, 20, 30 years before they change the vision. Google changed it when they had so many things that they actually split out Alphabet as a parent company and started splitting up the companies. But that's the order of change that's happening, right? It's very slow because it is that big unachievable goal, right? And then obviously as you get down to what you're actually building in those epics, in those stories, it's constantly changing. You should be changing your mind as soon as you're learning something new from your customer, right? Principles, because they reflect that vision and strategy, they change, but they evolve more slowly. So it's a little harder to map on that nice vertical chart. And it's important because, as Jeff Bezos of Amazon says, you have to be stubborn on the vision, but flexible on the details. So he's believed in this vision from day one of being this global e-commerce behemoth, but he's been flexible on the details of how to get there. And it's really about thinking about how to build a cadence of improvement. So a lot of companies, they have this, big goal setting, 2019, we're gonna set the plan, we set it in October, and then we're gonna check in 14 months later, did we achieve the goals or not? I hope you all realize that that's never gonna get you very far because you're kind of not checking in enough, right? If you're lucky, you're doing quarterly reviews, you're doing OKRs every quarter, you're kind of checking in, are we achieving our goals, how's that working out? But really what you need to be thinking about is every 2 weeks, if you're doing sprints at the end of a sprint, whatever it is, do progress checks constantly. Because you really need to build that cadence of learning. Are you making progress towards your goals? Because if you're not, you need to rethink the goals, you need to rethink the epics, maybe you need to rethink your strategy. What have you learned in that period that might change that strategy? Have you learned something new from your customers, from the marketplace? And like I said about principles, like what are the decisions that we keep coming up against, that we have to make a trade-off, that we can maybe codify into a principle? So now that we have a great vision, great strategy, and great execution, we know what to build, we know why we're building it, and we know how to build it. That's a pretty good thing, right? So keep asking questions, keep asking how. How are you going to achieve that vision? How are you going to achieve that strategy? How are you going to achieve those objectives? Whenever anybody comes and tells you this is what we're doing, ask how. And at the same time, ask why, right? So that you build up as well as down. Because that's the only way that we can answer those questions that we started with about what is it that we're doing, why are we doing it, and how do we actually want to achieve that. Thank you very much. Do you want to take some questions?
You might have to flick back in the slides. You had a thing about what not to do, something related to strategy being goals. I was
Yeah.
wondering if you could give an example of what you mean by that.
So I think whenever anyone, if you're asking that question of like how, like if you're asking for a strategy and someone kind of tells you, oh, our strategy is to achieve 10% revenue growth or 10%, move a metric by 10%. That's not a strategy, right? That's a goal. The strategy has to be understanding why you might want to make that change, right? The strategy might be, we want to increase unit economics so that we have we are safer from competition. Okay, well, how are you going to do that? Well, okay, we think we have to increase or reduce churn by 10%, right? So that's the goal that helps you achieve that strategy. So it's kind of abstracting it one layer up, if that makes sense. It's basically the warning sign is as soon as anybody mentions a number as a strategy, it's probably not a strategy. They're setting a goal, and they maybe haven't thought through what the strategic objective is that you're trying to achieve by building that thing or achieving that goal. If they're talking about both things, that's fine, but one is strategy and one is really an objective or goal that you're setting in order to achieve that. Does that make sense?
Okay, so you would, and a way maybe to avoid that is to do the opposite thing.
Yeah, so just keep ask why. So like if someone comes and tells you, well, our strategy is to reduce churn by 10%, it's like, well, why are we doing that? And if they can't articulate that, then like maybe help them figure out like what are we actually trying to achieve? Why do we do that? So that they come back with the answer of like, oh, well, our strategy is to improve unit economics so that we, our burn rate is slower or whatever that is that helps you achieve the vision above that. Again, asking why again. It's really just getting that abstraction layer. But I think it's kind of a good red flag that you actually do hear quite a lot. It's like our strategy is to be 10% cheaper. It's like, it's not a strategy. Like, why is that a strategy? So helping them kind of ask that question. Anyone else?
How do you justify even overstatements? I think it was a very interesting thing you brought up. One of the examples is user growth even over the last 2 years. But how do you justify something, especially if it's most of the time you're trying to make generate revenue, and this comes it's impeding it.
I think it really is, it's helping the company understand what those trade-offs are so that you are more focused on the strategic objective, right? So I think a good example recently is probably WeWork, where WeWork, if they had to make an even overstatement, right, they probably would have said basically growth over revenue, right? All they cared about was growth. They were just opening new offices, bringing on new customers. That was all they cared about, and that helped drive the valuation that they had. But recently, obviously, with the IPO failure and other things, it kind of realized that like the unit economics are kind of really broken, right? Because they made those choices, and you can argue whether that was the right choice or not. But if you don't flip the argument, and now they're much more focused on unit economics, whether it's too late or not. Like now, it's much more about okay, what is the revenue per just chair or office that we have or desk? How does that compare to our competitors? How do we price better? Like it drives very different behavior and very different decision making throughout the product building process. And WeWork, I think, is a fascinating example because they've obviously had to switch, but you could argue that if they'd made that switch 5 years ago, their valuation wouldn't have been as high as it was, but maybe they would have survived, or we don't know if they're going to survive or not necessarily, but it would have changed very much the trajectory of the company. And I think it totally depends. It depends on what your belief is of where the company is going. I think even if you look at Facebook, in the very early days when they were growing, they were definitely focused on user growth over revenue, right? It was all about how do we get people on board. Every decision was around how do we get more people on board, how do we understand, how do we drive that user behavior. They were very early on to be very data-driven around thinking about, okay, so we need that magic kind of aha moment is when somebody has 7 connections on Facebook. So how do we help get people to 7 connections, right? So they had a very clear strategy around user growth because they knew, as an ad-driven platform, they knew that if they grew big enough, the advertisers had to come to them, right? And they could build their revenue later. And they had a long enough runway, they had investors who believed in the same thing, so they could drive that decision. I think WeWork was following the same path in a very kind of accelerated way and with very different unit economics and kind of forgot that it wasn't a software business. But that's the kind of setting a good strategy is all about setting those trade-offs, right? And I think as a company or at a product level, like you have to think about what is most important to us right now, right? And maybe in the early days of a startup, it is growth. It's all about growth because your VCs are funding your growth. And then at some point you have to figure out how to monetize it and do it in a margin enhancing way, right? Does that kind of make sense? Like it's really helping you focus on what's most important. And again, that's why it changes, right? Strategies do change. Principles do change. Because maybe that's right for you for the first 2 years, but then you have to be like, okay, we've grown to a certain point, now we actually have to optimize for the opposite, right?
So does that mean that balancing is a dumb idea to do it? It's more important to do a trade-off?
I think in most cases, trying to find that kind of perfect compromise means that you're not going to be good at one or the other, right? If you're trying to, and especially if you're thinking like, if you're thinking at a startup level, at a company level, or even at a product level, right? You can only build so many things. Like even if it's just me and as a product manager, my engineers, my designer, I can only build so many things. So, do I want to build a little bit of this and a little bit of that and do both? Or do I want to really focus in on what is the most important thing for my product area, my business, my unit, whatever, and really excel at that? And maybe that's only for 3 months, and then you flip to another 3 months. But like, it's really making that clear. And I think it's so important for that decision-making velocity because it really helps reduce that friction, right? You're not having that conversation every sprint of like, oh, should we do this or this? No, we're zeroed in on this. We're doing that for 3 months. Let's just focus on doing that. We don't have to have the conversation, right?
I think you mentioned that in the process of coming up with a good strategy, it's inevitable that some intriguing leaps are taken at a leadership level. What advice would you give to someone who is looking to hone this position?
As in the intuition of when to involve them or how to involve them? Sorry.
How?
Okay. I think really it's about going to them with those questions, right? It's like, okay, I've understood my goal is this. Why is that my goal? Like, what are we trying to achieve, right? And asking for that next level up and just bringing them into that conversation. I think at every level up, we should always be asking like, why are we doing that? So that you really can push it back to a company goal or a company strategy or vision. And if that connection isn't clear, then that's definitely a conversation you should be having of like going back and going like, okay, I know you told me like this is what we're doing. I just want to understand like how does this fit into our company goals? How is this helping us achieve that strategy or that vision that we talked about? And generally, like that's not a negative conversation, right? That's just you asking for clarity and understanding. You're not saying I don't want to do this. You're just wanting to understand how it connects the dots. And if it isn't connecting the dots, don't go and tell them it's not, like, this makes no freaking sense. Why are we doing this? It's not helping achieve the goals. You still go in with that kind of humble attitude of like, help me understand, like, I want to just connect this to the vision that we talked about, like, how is this connecting? And even by having the conversation, you might be helping them realize that, like, oh yeah, okay, that isn't actually super clear. Let's figure out how to clarify that, or maybe we don't have to focus on that. Let's do this. And I think that kind of just asking very humbly, like, help me connect the dots. Why are we doing this? And the same, like, as you go down, like, how are we going to achieve that? I think just thinking and not thinking about, you know, how am I connecting this one user story straight up to the vision, right? Like, that's a harder leap to make. So kind of think about making it every layer up. Like, how does this help with an epic? How does that epic help with an objective? How does that help with a strategy? That makes it less difficult a conversation as well, I think.
How do you manage a situation whereby leadership does not have vision?
Again, this might be a cultural challenge, but it depends on the relationship I think you have with leadership, right? So I've been in startup situations in Europe and the US where that vision isn't clear. And again, I kind of start with that conversation of like, okay, well, why are we doing that? Like, what is the next order thing up? And almost, you know, using some of the techniques Rosemary was talking about, like help map that out for them. Like, what does this look like? Why do we need a vision? What does it make sense? And just bring them into that conversation and just like set up a workshop almost. Let's clarify a vision. Like, how do we set that? What are we trying to achieve? What is the thing that we're trying to do? And it's actually kind of fun when you get into it and you understand that like it can help you and your team execute. So leadership tends to be pretty on board with letting you drive that car, like drive that journey, and make that happen really in the company. So if they're the kind of leader that's maybe very business oriented or very technical, and they don't really think about that kind of vision piece, having you kind of step in and go like, hey, I really think it'd be helpful if we had a product vision, like this is why, like it'll help us connect some dots. So let's get together for a couple of hours, bring in some of the rest of the team, and let's think about like, what is the thing that we're trying to solve? Like, what is that big picture thing that we're trying to use? And I think that'll help, and that's a way for you to help them become more vision oriented, if that makes sense. Is that a hand?
What are some bad visions?
I think bad visions are very like, especially company centric. So like we want to be the biggest X in the world. Like that's all about the company. It's not about a customer or a problem that you're trying to solve. And sadly, you see a lot of those. I think even Mind a Product in the early days, we probably had something that was much more about like, we want to be the biggest community or like the go-to thing, and that was all about us, right? And so we flipped it around about a year and a half ago when we kind of tried to clarify what is it we're doing? Like why do we come to work every day? Why are we excited about doing this thing? And we clarified it as to help make product people more successful by coming together to further our craft. And even just kind of framing that around helping product people be more successful, whatever success means to all of the people that are our customers and part of our community, has helped, I think, everyone in the team be much clearer about what it is that we're trying to do and why we do those things. But if you'd flipped it around and be like, we want to be the biggest and best in the world, like it drives very different behavior and it's not really about a customer. So I think that's one of the biggest ones that I see is kind of a customer-centric vision versus a company-centric one. One more question?
Yeah, that's the last one.
Last question? Or does everyone want to get back to the beers? Totally understandable. Enjoy the beers. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Sylvia and the team, for having me.
Thanks so much. A big round of applause.